3 weeks of the war between Israel and Hamas. In the last 2 days, we've seen 2 ground operations. The death toll continues to rise. The US is striking Iranian targets in Syria. Iran is issuing threats to America at the United Nations. These are 2 allies turned enemies. Both have strategic assets all over West Asia. If they are drawn into the war, there's no telling how big it could become. Meanwhile, the fate of Israeli hostages hangs in the balance. Is there any plan to rescue them? Hamas says 50 of them have been killed in Israeli airstrikes. Israel rejects the claim. Halfway across the world, news of another dangerous encounter. A Chinese jet came within 10 feet of a US bomber over the South China Sea. Meanwhile, another Chinese ship has docked in Sri Lanka. We'll tell you why India is concerned. Germany has overtaken the economy of Japan. Both are shrinking, but Japan is shrinking faster. From credit card sales to inflation and electoral politics, the impact of Taylor Swift knows no bounds. We'll bring you a report. And should Indians work 70 hours a week? Narayan Murthy's suggestion has stirred a debate. We'll discuss that. The headlines first. Russia says it has foiled a Ukrainian drone attack on its nuclear plant. Reports say 2 of the drones failed to detonate, but the third exploded near the Kursk nuclear power station. Moscow says radiation levels around the plant are normal. No relief for Imran Khan. The Islamabad High Court has rejected his bail plea in the Cypher case. The former Pakistani Prime Minister is accused of leaking state secrets. Since August, Imran Khan has been in jail in a separate case. He faces over 100 cases. Setback for LGBT rights in South Korea. A court upholds the ban on gay sex in the military. It says same-sex relationships could harm combat readiness and undermine discipline. Those found guilty face up to 2 years in prison. Tokyo bans alcohol at its tourist hotspot Shibuya. This is to discourage Halloween gatherings a year after the deadly tragedy in South Korea. In 2022, nearly 160 people were crushed to death in a narrow alley in Seoul. And Australia will restart aerial shooting of wild horses. The contentious practice will resume to protect the native wildlife. In the last 2 years, wild horses in the Kosciuszko National Park have increased by over 30%. There are 19,000 wild horses now. Authorities want to bring the number down to 3,000 by 2027. It's day 21 of the Israel-Hamas war, and some ground action has begun. Overnight, Israeli infantry entered the Gaza Strip. We're talking about tanks and soldiers. They entered the Gaza Strip, and they carried out a raid and returned. Sort of like a smash and leave. Israeli fighter jets and drones were also involved. They gave air cover to the ground assets. The IDF has released a video of this raid. If you look closely, you can see the column of tanks in action. Take a look. Now, what did this mission achieve? Israel says it destroyed Hamas missile launch sites, also their command and control centers. Now, these raids are important because they set the stage for the full-blown invasion. Israel carried out similar raids on Wednesday night as well. So that's 2 days of ground operations. Does that mean the invasion will happen soon? Well, Israel's defense minister has spoken out. He says D-Day is not far off.
We are waging war on the southern front against Hamas. We are prepared for any development in the north. However, we have no interest in expanding the war. Our goal is to win the war and return the hostages. The maneuver will come, and the day it will happen is not far off. It will happen when the conditions are right in order to strike Hamas organization.
But do Israeli citizens agree? That was the whole idea behind the invasion, to satisfy the public demand for revenge. Well, the numbers now tell a different story. A recent poll found that 49% of Israelis want to hold off the invasion. That's almost half of them. 29% Israelis say, go ahead, and 22% are undecided. Now compare this to a poll that was held on the 19th of October. Back then, 65% Israelis supported a ground invasion. So clearly, opinion is shifting. The question is why? And it could be a number of reasons here. Maybe concern for the hostages inside Gaza or concern for family members conscripted to fight. But just to be clear, these people are not saying don't invade. They're saying delay the invasion. Nonetheless, Prime Minister Netanyahu should take note of this sentiment. He needs to sell this invasion to the public, especially since the strategic goals are not clear. Even his allies want him to take a pause. Like the European Union, their leaders held a summit on Thursday, and from the moment they arrived, it was pressure. Because these were the scenes outside the summit venue in Brussels, a major pro-Palestine rally. Such rallies have been held across European capitals. So EU leaders were under the pump. After the meeting, they called for a humanitarian pause to allow aid.
We
can see the serious deterioration of the humanitarian situation and the importance of developing measures to guarantee access to equipment and humanitarian aid. Food, water, electricity, medicines, we need to be very active, including the humanitarian corridors, humanitarian pauses, to allow the humanitarian aid to be delivered.
So the EU wants a pause. The Americans too have said something similar. But to pause the fighting, the UN Security Council must pass a resolution, and that is quite unlikely because Russia and China want a ceasefire. In fact, Moscow is hosting a Hamas delegation. It is led by this man, Musa Abu Marzouk. He's a founder and leader of the Hamas. Marzouk held talks with Russia's deputy foreign minister. They discussed hostages. At least 6 of the hostages have Russian citizenship. So Moscow does have a stake here, but their ambitions are much bigger. If Putin can get Hamas to release hostages, he can place himself as a mediator. And Hamas has talked about it, about exchanging hostages for a ceasefire. Having said that, we don't know if Israel will accept such a deal. The UN General Assembly is also on the job. Arab states have pushed a resolution calling for a ceasefire. Look at the Security Council.
My mission distributed and will continue to distribute QR codes with a direct link to files where you can see this horror and many other Hamas atrocities. What you see here are not pictures from Auschwitz, but Israelis raped, butchered, and burned alive.
I don't have videos to show you. We respect the dead too much. We respect the pain of their families too much to show videos. But check out your mobiles. Thousands of videos depicting the abomination, the horror, the inhumanity to which thousands of Palestinians are being subjected and have been subjected.
1,000 Palestinians killed every day. Why not feel a sense of urgency to end their killing? Nothing can justify war crimes, crime against humanity, and genocide. Nothing can justify the killing of a single Palestinian child.
So it's Arab nations versus Israel. Today is day 2 of the General Assembly. A vote is expected later tonight. It will be a test of diplomacy for many countries, including India. But the result itself is pointless. You see, the Security Council resolutions are binding. The General Assembly ones are not. So Israel can simply go ahead and ignore them, like Russia has in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the situation in Gaza continues to get worse. Hospitals are running out of beds, food and electricity are running low. Even the United Nations aid agencies are now helpless. They have reduced their operations within the Gaza Strip. Why? Because there is no fuel. You need fuel to operate aid trucks and vehicles, to keep generators running. But the UN says fuel reserves are running low. Israel, of course, has rejected all of this. They say Hamas is holding all the fuel in their own tankers. And this is what happens in a war, when basic facts become hard to confirm. Consider the death toll, for example. Officials in Gaza say it's more than 7,000. More than 7,000 people have died. This is what the Gazans say. But the US president says he doesn't believe it.
No notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed. I'm sure innocents have been killed, and it's the price of waging a war. I think we should be incredibly careful, but I have no confidence in the number that the Palestinians are using.
His argument is this: Gaza's health ministry is run by the Hamas, so why should anyone trust their numbers? To dispute this, officials in Gaza have released a document. It's more than 200 pages long. It has the names of more than 7,000 Palestinians, those killed in Israeli strikes. Honestly, we don't know what the truth is. But looking at the devastation in Gaza, 7,000 is not impossible. Meanwhile, the fate of the hostages still hangs in the balance. With each passing day, their families are losing hope. The Hamas is adding to their anguish. Yesterday, they made a big claim. They said at least 50 hostages are dead. That's what the Hamas said. 50 hostages dead. They were killed in Israeli airstrikes. And who are these hostages? We don't know their identities. There is no independent verification. All we have are some telegram messages. The claim was made by the armed wing of Hamas. It is called the Al-Qassam Brigades. And what is Israel saying about this? Well, off the record, Israeli officials are dismissing this claim. The Western press has also published some statements. Israel says this is just a pressure tactic. Hamas is building a false narrative to manipulate the world and to pressurize Israel to stop the attacks. And now there's some merit to this accusation, because Hamas is indeed trying to mount pressure by leveraging the hostages. Last week, they released a video. We showed it to you. It featured a hostage, a 21-year-old girl called Mia Shem. She's a French Israeli. In the video, she was seen lying on the bed. Her arm was bandaged, and you can see a scar. There was also a message.
היי, אני מיה שם. כרגע אני נמצאת בעזה. אני מבקשת שיחזירו אותי הביתה כמה שיותר מהר, למשפחה שלי, להורים שלי, לאחים שלי. בבקשה תוציאו אותנו מפה כמה שיותר מהר. בבקשה. תודה.
Clearly, that was a message from the captors. They're using hostages to build pressure, not just on Israel, but on its allies too. At this point, though, Netanyahu is unlikely to give in.
We are in the middle of a war for our existence. We have set two goals for the war: to annihilate Hamas by destroying its military and governance abilities, and to do everything possible to bring our hostages back home.
Netanyahu said that 2 days ago. The families of the victims are nervous as Israel prepares for a ground invasion. What's their plan for the hostages? Is there a rescue strategy? We hope there is. It's obviously not public. But there is ambiguity on the numbers too. No one knows exactly how many hostages are there in Gaza. Last week, Hamas gave a number. They said they had 250 hostages, 200 captured by Hamas, 50 by other outfits. But Israel gave a different count. Israeli Defense Forces said there are 203 hostages. Then yesterday they came up with a new number, 224 hostages. Are all of them alive? It's not clear at this point. And there's another complication. There are foreigners among the hostages. Again, we don't have an exact number, but reports say hostages held by Hamas have passports from 25 different countries. The list includes Germany, France, Russia, and the United States. 4 hostages were released this week. There were also reports of a rescue operation. Earlier, the IDF released a video apparently showing a military operation around Gaza. Israel says it rescued these hostages. The families need more assurances. They want their loved ones back. They've come together to launch campaigns and to hold protests. One such protest took place in Tel Aviv yesterday. The family members slammed the government and issued an ultimatum.
I'm calling on all the governors, and I'm not talking left or right, up or down. It's all of you. After this story is over, your place will be in the garbage bin of history. And the only ones who will benefit in the eyes of history are the ones who will return the hostages.
They want to throw politicians into the quote-unquote garbage bin of history. It's not just Israelis. Families of American hostages are also building pressure. Some of them gathered at the Capitol Hill. They met with U.S. lawmakers and they sought their intervention.
We represent about 220 hostages from 35 different nationalities. we demand not only the U.S., but all of the international community put at its highest agenda, number one agenda, bringing the hostages back home now.
I urge you, the people of the United States, to stand by your congressmen and senators and send them your support. The United States is the only one who can lead this international effort to make our loved ones come back safely.
They want an international effort, but it's not going to be easy. Israel's focus right now is on taking out Hamas targets. And a major claim has come to light. It says Israel wants to flood the tunnels used by Hamas. They want to flood the Hamas tunnels. That's the claim of Seymour Hersh, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, controversial and famous for his investigations. Earlier this year, he made news for another report. It was about the Nord Stream pipeline. You may remember this. This is the pipeline used to supply gas from Russia to Europe, and Hersh said the US had sabotaged this pipeline. His claims gained traction, but multiple stakeholders rejected them. And now Seymour Hersh is back. This time, he claims to have intel about Israel's war plans. At the center of it are the tunnels of Hamas, the large underground network that they've built in Gaza. It is used to store and supply weapons and people. Reports say some hostages are being kept in these tunnels. If Israel floods this tunnel system, it will flush out Hamas. But what happens to the hostages? Hersh says Israel may sacrifice them. It may prioritize the ground offensive over their lives. This is a very controversial claim. No one on the Israeli side, of course, has confirmed this. But for the families of hostages, it's a scary prospect. Given the international pressure, Israel will have to weigh every move carefully. Vantage continues after a short break.
A reason why USA is deploying another warship also in the region, sending about 900 troops, sending THAAD batteries, patriotic missiles and other weaponries that could not only defend US forces in the region but also can provide a deterrence in the region. That is what US government has been saying. Meanwhile, the situation in Syria and in Middle East remains very fluid. There have been multiple attacks on US forces in the last few days, and in one of those attacks, about 21 US personnel were injured also. And these responses that USA have been doing, our USA side has saying that these are because of the escalation from the Iranian proxies in the region. Secretary of Defense Austin Lloyd has said that US Eisenhower and THAAD battery and additional Patriot BNS to the CENTCOM region are being readied, and this was about 4 days ago, and now USA has finally sent about 900 troops, THAAD battery missiles and Patriot missiles and another warship in that region. And USA has said that this will bolster the US presence, strengthen their military bases in the region. It will also create a deterrence against US forces in the region and deterring a full-scale conflict. And at the same time, it will also provide an additional support to Israel in case of need. USA had earlier last week also, USA had shot down a missile in the Red Sea which was launched from Yemen towards USA. There were certain troops who were injured. US Navy has said that Houthi rebels had launched that missile in the Red Sea, where USA tried to shoot it down. And
This war is between Israel and Hamas, but backing them are two sworn rivals, the United States and Iran. In many ways, they're already fighting. Iran has proxies all over West Asia, like in Lebanon, Yemen and Iraq. And these proxies have been targeting US assets. We've seen drone attacks on bases in Syria and Iraq, at least 16 of them in the last 1 week. In each case, the US forces acted in defense. They shot down the drones. But today they went on the offensive. US fighter jets struck down 2 storage facilities in Syria, places where weapons are stored. These facilities were used by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, so the US destroyed them. It comes after Joe Biden issued a warning to Iran. The White House says it was a direct message to the supreme leader of Iran, a warning to stay away from American troops. If true, it's a rare move. But Iran says no such message has been received. Here's a statement by their presidential aide. It says, if Biden thinks that he warned Iran, he should ask his team to show him the text of the messages. I'm guessing the airstrikes did just that. But Iran is not backing down. Their foreign minister issued a threat of his own, that too at the United Nations. He said if the attacks on Gaza continue, even the US will not be spared.
I say frankly to the American statesmen who are now managing the genocide in Palestine that we do not welcome to expansion of the war in the region. But I warn, if the genocide in Gaza continues, they will not be spared from this fire. It is our home, and West Asia is our region.
Tough words there, but how serious is this threat? To understand that, let's look at two things. One, the US deployments in West Asia, and two, Iranian proxies. Let's start with the deployments. The US has more than 30,000 troops in the region, 30,000. Yesterday, they sent 900 more. The largest presence is in Qatar. Around 8,000 US soldiers are in the Al Udeid base. Iraq has around 2,500 US soldiers. Syria has just 900 of them. Saudi Arabia and the UAE also have a sizable presence. Around 2,700 in Saudi Arabia and around 2,000 in the UAE. Then you have Jordan, another key ally of the US in the region. Jordan hosts around 2,800 American soldiers. Plus there are troops in Turkey, Bahrain, Kuwait and Egypt, basically all over West Asia. There are American soldiers all over West Asia, and these soldiers are backed by some major firepower. We'll stick to the latest deployments. You have two carrier strike groups in the eastern Mediterranean, the USS Gerald Ford and the USS Dwight Eisenhower. THAAD missiles have been sent to Saudi Arabia. Patriot missiles have been deployed in Kuwait, Jordan and Iraq. And an extra squadron of F-16 jets has also been deployed. Like I said, these are all recent deployments. Now let's look at Iran. Their West Asian presence is not direct. It is via proxy groups, like the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the Badr organization in Iraq, and the Liva Fatemiyun in Syria. We're talking about thousands of fighters here. The Hezbollah alone claims to have 100,000, 1 lakh fighters. They cannot match America's military quality. But like Iran's foreign minister said, it is their home. And home advantage counts. If you look back at history, Iran and the US have had an interesting relationship. At one point, they were allies, Iran and the US. In 1953, the US and the UK plotted a coup in Iran. They ousted the then Iranian prime minister. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh. And the reason was oil. Mossadegh had nationalized the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. He wanted the West out. So the CIA decided to topple him. In his place, they brought back Iran's Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Unlike Mossadegh, he was friendly to the West. For the next 3 decades, there was great cooperation. In 1957, Iran and the US signed a nuclear agreement. In fact, the US taught nuclear technology to Iran. They also gave them reactors and fuel. And look how it's backfired. Today, Washington is trying to shut down Iran's nuclear program. Their era of cooperation ended in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution. That's when the Ayatollah captured power. The Shah of Iran fled the country. The same year, 52 Americans were taken hostage at the US Embassy in Tehran. Guess how long they were held? 444 days. After sanctions, freezes and threats, they were released. But the relations were spoiled. Today, Washington and Tehran have no formal relations. Their main issue is Iran's nuclear program. Joe Biden came to power promising to revive the nuclear deal. But after this war, good luck. Recent events will give Iranian hardliners more power. They will see it as more reason to have nuclear weapons. As the US firms up its defenses in West Asia, it is facing fresh challenges in the East. We're talking about the South China Sea. Beijing is testing American defenses. A dangerous encounter took place this week. Take a look at this. That was a Chinese military plane. It was flying over the South China Sea and it ended in an unsafe maneuver. This could have easily caused a collision. The Chinese plane had a close call with an American aircraft, a B-52 bomber. It was airborne at the same time. The Chinese plane came dangerously close to it. It was just 10 feet away from the American bomber. Initially, the Chinese pilot approached rapidly. Then he maneuvered in front of the bomber, and finally he crossed under the American jet's wing. It was a very close shave. Now, the US forces have released a statement. They're calling the Chinese pilot, quote-unquote, unprofessional. The statement also has a detailed account. The US says the Chinese pilot was flying his plane below and in front of America's jet, and he was doing so, and I'm quoting, at an uncontrolled and excessive speed. That's what the US has said. And what is China's response? More accusations. Beijing has released a video of its own. This one does not feature an airplane. Instead, it shows two warships. China says a US warship is harassing their navy, the Chinese Navy. Take a look at this now.
US warship 114, this is Chinese 164. You are crossing my...
Now, this did not happen recently. This video is from the month of August. Again, this happened in the South China Sea. China says its ship was on a routine training. That's when it was approached by the American warship, the USS Ralph Johnson. Beijing says this was a quote-unquote close-in harassment. And it wants the US to back off. So it is asserting itself with these tactics. Beijing wants American military assets to leave the South China Sea. That's unlikely, especially after Biden's outburst this week. China has had some encounters with the Philippines too. We've been telling you about them. And the US president spoke about it. He said if Filipino vessels are attacked, the US will respond with force.
I want to be clear. I want to be very clear. The United States defense commitment to the Philippines is ironclad. The United States defense agreement with the Philippines is ironclad.
Now, Biden could not have timed this better. A day after that statement, China's foreign minister arrived in Washington. Wang Yi is meeting senior US officials. Yesterday, he met his American counterpart, Antony Blinken. The world was expecting fireworks, but Wang Yi adopted a completely different tone.
China and the United States are two major countries. We have disagreements, we have differences. At the same time, we also share important common interests, and we face challenges. So we need to respond together.
Seems like Beijing is looking for an opening. There is talk of a dialogue at the military level. Beijing is soon set to host an event where cooperation on international security will be discussed, and reports say that the US will send a representative, an official of the US Defense Department. And this is a shift because last year China froze military contact with America. This was after Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. She was the US House Speaker back then. And there's also speculation of a meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. That could happen as soon as next month, which is why Wang Yi is visiting Washington in the first place. He is laying the groundwork for that meeting. So the US and China are trying to mend ties. But can Biden trust Xi Jinping? He has good reasons to be cautious. The tensions in the South China Sea do not help, but the bigger worry is the instability of Xi Jinping. No one knows what he'll do next. In recent months, he has sacked his defense and foreign ministers, two very important cabinet portfolios. Both went missing, both were subsequently fired. Now their replacements have been named. But these are men who lead conversations with America. And they keep vanishing without a trace. If they keep vanishing without a trace, global engagements will suffer. For instance, if there's another tense face-off in the South China Sea, who will the Americans call? Who will they negotiate with? So at this point, we say Biden's biggest challenge is Xi Jinping's unpredictability. Meanwhile, back in China, it's a day of mourning. Their former premier Li Keqiang has died. He suffered a heart attack and passed away about 10 minutes after midnight. He was 68 years old. Li Keqiang was just beginning to enjoy his retirement. He stepped down from the post of premier in March this year, ending a decade of being sidelined and silenced. You see, Li Keqiang was not like the rest of China's top leadership. He was not one of Xi Jinping's yes men. Rather, he was a remnant of the bygone times, an economic pragmatist, loyal to Xi Jinping's predecessor, Hu Jintao. At one point, he was even considered a potential rival to Xi. Perhaps that's why there's been a muted response to Li Keqiang's death so far. Our next report tells you the full story.
China's former premier Li Keqiang has passed away. He had a heart attack last night.
On October 26th, he suffered a sudden heart attack. After all-out efforts to revive him failed, he died in Shanghai at 10 minutes past midnight on October 27th at the age of 68.
The 68-year-old Li was in Shanghai when it happened. Many in China are mourning his passing.
As a premier, Li made great contribution to our economy. His death is a big loss.
He really accompanied the growth of our generation, and that's how it feels in my heart. I just suddenly heard this news from you. My mind has gone blank, and I was really sad.
Many are praising Li's economic contributions. Those who have found a way to talk about him at least. China seems to be cracking down on mourners. Beijing doesn't want an outpouring of grief transforming into criticism. Li Keqiang was a celebrated economist. In fact, he was once known for a brand of development called Leaconomics. He had found a way to measure China's growth accurately despite muddled numbers from the ground. It was dubbed the Li Keqiang Index and was taken as a sign of his vision. He was considered a liberal who wanted to open up China's economy. He wanted to reduce China's wealth gap and modernize its trade. Beijing seems afraid of people remembering Li's economic acumen and comparing it to the economy's current state of freefall. Li Keqiang also had his flaws. He is thought to have underplayed an HIV/AIDS epidemic while he was governing China's Henan province. And he didn't give space to activists or the media. But there were still high hopes for him when he first became premier in 2013. Hopes that he would continue on the path set by China's former presidents, Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin. These were the leaders who presided over China's greatest period of continuous economic growth. And people thought Hu Jintao's protege Li would keep the ball rolling. Some expected him to succeed his mentor as president. But unfortunately for Li, he faced one major obstacle, Xi Jinping. Xi became China's president after Hu Jintao. Li had to settle for the second most powerful position in China, that of premier. But that's when it all started to unravel for him.
If we go back 10 years ago, when Premier Li Keqiang first came to power, we were talking about this notion of Xi-Li era, when the General Secretary and the Premier both yield significant power. However, in the last few years, increasingly, we're only talking about Xi Jinping, and certainly we see that reflected in media discourse as well when they talk about the Xi Jinping new era.
Xi doesn't take kindly to those challenging his authority. All rivals get silenced. Li Keqiang met a similar fate. Xi Jinping slowly stripped him of his authority and power, instead of allowing him to spread his Leaconomics. Xi formed and chaired a committee which overruled the premier. This was in the first year of his premiership, and this stifling continued for 10 years. A recent example is COVID. The premier wanted to keep China's economy running. He cautioned against the excesses of Xi Jinping's zero-COVID policy. But the president paid him no heed. Xi Jinping sidelined Li Keqiang like he did with former President Hu Jintao. Some of you may remember this uncomfortable moment from the Chinese Communist Party Congress last November. That's the former president being escorted out. As he leaves, you see Hu Jintao giving a friendly gesture to one person. The person was his one-time protege, Li Keqiang. That Congress was when Li decided to step down from the party's senior leadership. He didn't seek to retain the premiership this March either. Perhaps he knew that there was no point, because the China of today is molded in Xi Jinping's image, and there's no room for anyone else.
Vantage continues after a short break.
in the last few days, what USA has been continuously telling the world that it doesn't want the war between Israel and other nation to escalate into full-fledged conflict in the region. But at the same time, US is preparing all possibilities. Many warships have been sent into the region. High quality guided precision missiles were sent to the region, and there is a preparedness for any eventuality that US forces might see in that region. Meanwhile, Syrian war continues to go on. There are multiple factions in Syria who have been supported by many countries, including USA, Russia, Iran. We have seen USA siding along with the rebel forces. Then Russia and Iran are backing the Al-Assad regime. So there are certain geographies which is controlled by the rebel forces. Then there are certain geographies controlled by the Assad forces, and these geographies keep changing with the ongoing war. Sometimes some faction take advantage of the situation. But then there are rebel factions, and there are numerous of them. We have seen some of which they have been receiving varying degree of support from various countries present in the region. Kurdish forces, they are also one of the stronghold, and they have been backed by USA in many ways. Then there are presence of Islamic groups, ISIS as well. We have seen USA and other nations fighting against the ISIS. At peak of ISIS, it has captured swath of Iraq and Syrian land. Then there are international involvement also. Sometimes Turkey government also gets involved. We have recently seen Israeli government striking Aleppo airport. Major cities in Yemen have been attacked by these countries. So the situation in Syria always remains very fluid in the last 1 decade, at least since the launch or since the beginning of the civil war that has started in Syria. But with the latest the latest strike of US forces into that region, it will remain to be seen whether this is going ahead towards a full-fledged escalation, where the countries like Iran, Syria, Russia, and the other country present in the Middle East region could also get dragged into this conflict, or this is just a preparedness from the USA side, as it has said, and a deterrent in the region that will ensure that the wars does not escalate to a full-fledged conflict, and the situation remains where it is right now. US missiles have targeted some eastern part of Syria, which were used by Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces, and this is the latest that is happening in Syria, and the US military forces have termed these missile attacks as a way of self-defense, and they were conducted at two facilities in eastern Syria, where the Iranian IRGC, the Iranian guards, are using these facilities to support Syria's government right now. And this is also happening in the wake of in the last 1.5 weeks, several attacks have happened on US forces present in the area, and with the latest escalation that one can witness in happening in Middle East, US is also trying to send about
Another Chinese ship has docked in Sri Lanka. Beijing calls it a research vessel, but their research often means spying. So reports say India is concerned. This particular ship is called the Xi'an 6. It arrived in Colombo on the 25th of October. It is slated to remain there until tomorrow. And what is it doing there? Sri Lanka's foreign ministry says the visit is for replenishment, to refuel and stock up. It also said permission was not granted for research, and this is quite important. China wanted to carry out joint research with Lankan institutions. That was the whole point of the voyage, but Colombo denied permission. Could India have played a role in that? Well, it's certainly possible. India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar visited Sri Lanka this month. He also met President Ranil Wickremesinghe. Reports say he raised the issue of this Chinese vessel. Apparently, he asked Colombo to deny permission. And looks like it worked. But Sri Lanka is not out of the woods yet. Last year, a similar research vessel docked in Sri Lanka. It was called the Yuan Wong 5. Same thing happened then. The voyage was initially slated for August 11th last year. When India protested, it was delayed. But eventually, the ship did arrive. It stayed in Sri Lanka for 6 days. So China's strategy is clear. They are sending these vessels to challenge India's position in Sri Lanka, to undermine India's influence. And protest or not, they will keep coming. The question is, how will Sri Lanka respond? This time they've tried to make both sides happy. China by letting them dock and India by denying research permission. But in the long term, it is not viable. And Colombo knows this. Their foreign minister recently talked about the big power rivalries between India, China and the US. He said Sri Lanka does not want to get involved. But I'm afraid that's not an option. Sri Lanka is located on one of the busiest shipping lanes. It's a key port in the Indian Ocean. So whether Colombo likes it or not, it is a part of this game. It's only a question of how to play it. Earlier this year, President Wickremesinghe visited India. He made a promise to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He said that Sri Lanka will not be used as a base to threaten India. Yet Chinese ships dock at their ports, ships with known spying capabilities. Why do you think that's the case? Because Sri Lanka needs China's help. Beijing owns around 10% of Sri Lanka's total loans, plus 52% of their external loans. Colombo needs China to restructure this debt. If not, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, will not give the bailout money. Until this month, China was playing hardball. They refused to restructure the debt. But on the eve of the BRI summit, China's Belt and Road Summit, they relented. China and Sri Lanka struck a deal. In return, Wickremesinghe praised the BRI program. It's the reason why Sri Lanka landed in this mess in the first place. But Wickremesinghe called it the solution to all problems. Listen in.
Many other countries have debt problems too. In the face of new difficulties and major global challenges, we hope to find solutions by participating in international cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative.
How should India see all of this? It stood by Sri Lanka during the financial crisis. It gave assistance worth $4 billion, but clearly it's not enough. China still has considerable influence over Sri Lanka. After all, we call it a debt trap for a reason, because it's not easy to get out of. People assume that Colombo will automatically move away from China, especially after the debt crisis, but that's not happened. In fact, more Chinese companies have struck deals in Sri Lanka. So if India wants absolute influence in Colombo, it must work for it. More money, more projects and more engagements. If not, Sri Lanka will look for options. And now let's shift our focus to Germany. Economists have been calling it the sick man of Europe for months now. Turns out it may have been a small flu and not the Wuhan virus. Look at what the IMF has said. Germany's global economic rank will improve this year. Its GDP will overtake that of Japan. That sounds like good news, but does Berlin really have a reason to celebrate? Experts don't think so. You see, Germany's economy is predicted to have shrunk in the last fiscal quarter. That's according to their own central bank. They say the economy has shrunk, and it won't get better in the months ahead. This is their own government's prediction. They say the German economy will shrink this year. So how will it leapfrog Japan? It's simple. Japan is doing even worse. It's a race to the bottom, and Japan is winning it. Here's our report.
Economic forecasts are complicated. Often, they can seem contradictory to what's taking place before your very eyes, which is what the German people must be feeling after the International Monetary Fund's latest report. The IMF says Germany's economy is becoming the world's third largest this year, that it will overtake Japan and take a place below the US and China. Now this seems like great news, as though the economy is flourishing and there is no cost of living crisis, which isn't true, of course. In fact, it's the opposite. Germany's central bank, the Bundesbank, released this report on Monday. It believes the country's economy contracted in the last fiscal quarter. This is after it saw flat growth in the second quarter and another recession before that. The German government says the worst isn't over. It predicts the economy will shrink by 0.4% this year, and it has pinned the blame on Russia.
What we had to live through in 2023 is still linked to Vladimir Putin's war of aggression. High energy prices due to the lack of Russian gas to replace it, disrupted relations on the world market, high inflation, fought by high interest rates from the ECB to bring it down.
That was Germany's Minister for Economics. He has linked the downturn to Russia's war in Ukraine, which shows no sign of ending anytime soon. That should mean Germany's economy will be in trouble for the foreseeable future. Yet it's going to hit the number 3 spot. It's going to overtake Japan. How does that work? Well, because Japan's economy is shrinking faster than Germany's. Japan has also been hit by the war in Ukraine. Its economy has been contracting for the past few years. It was worth over $5 trillion in 2021, $4.24 trillion last year, and $4.23 trillion now, according to the IMF. But this doesn't mean that 15% of Japan's economy evaporated over the past 2 years. The reduction is partly because the Japanese yen is losing value rapidly. Yes, the value of your currency matters while calculating the GDP. Because GDP is measured in US dollars. If the value of the currency falls, so does the value of the economy. Simple, if not exactly precise. That's not all, of course. There are some tangible losses as well, like imports becoming more expensive because of the depreciating currency. But right now, the biggest threat to Japan's economic rank is the falling yen. For days, it's been hovering at about 150 yen to a dollar. Its worst level in decades. If that changes, the IMF's predictions may not come true. But however the race between Germany and Japan turns out, they should be looking over their shoulder at an emerging competitor. India is expected to overtake both nations by 2030. This is a prediction by the rating company S&P Global. It says India's economy will be worth around $7.3 trillion by the end of the decade. So while Germany and Japan are in this tight race, India might well be the ultimate winner.
Our next story is about a billionaire who has influenced politics and lifted entire economies. I'm talking about pop star Taylor Swift. These days she is the center of the music world, and for good reason. She has won 12 Grammy Awards. Her Eras tour is likely to be the highest grossing tour of all time, with over $2 billion in ticket sales alone. She dominates Super Bowl-sized arenas and movie theaters alike. She's even putting the National Football League on the map. Her political opinions have sway. At this point, it seems like she's a force of nature who can even make earthquakes happen, quite literally, because Taylor Swift is not just a performer, she is a phenomenon. Our next report tells you why.
Now let's turn our attention to Argentina. It's having a presidential election. It's heading to a runoff vote next month between these two candidates, left-winger Sergio Massa and far-right libertarian Javier Milei. After the polls closed on Sunday, Massa received the highest number of votes and Milei came in second. Now he has only weeks to pick up votes. But an unexpected quarter stands in his way. We're talking about Swifties, or fans of the pop sensation Taylor Swift. Swifties have burst into Argentina's election campaign, calling Milei a representative of the anti-democratic right. You see, Milei is a radical libertarian. He's proposed dollarizing Argentina's economy and legalizing organ trade. So Swifties are speaking against him and saying that they want to be on the right side of history. That's something Taylor Swift had said when she spoke against former US President Donald Trump in 2020. Now Swifties are following her example, even if it's hard to fight when the fight isn't fair. Swifties don't want to give up. That's the power of Swift. The pop star holds political sway. And it makes sense. Few artists have earned the chart hits, critical acclaim and fan support that Swift enjoys. Her career spans 2 decades. So far, she's won 12 Grammy Awards. She's had more #1 albums on the Billboard 200 than any other woman. Her Eras tour concludes next year, and it's likely to be the highest grossing tour of all time with about $2 billion in revenue. Swift is already a billionaire, but her success has also boosted economies. So far, the tour has increased consumer spending by $5 billion in the US. There's a term for this. It's called Swiftnomics. For many cities, she's not a nightmare dressed like a daydream. She is the dream. Swift boosted local economies. She even forced cities to ramp up poor transport systems and turned world leaders into reply guys. Remember Trudeau? But she doesn't just dominate Super Bowl-sized arenas. She's also taken over movie theaters. Her concert film has ranked in $96 million already. It's the highest grossing film domestically for an opening weekend. It seems like everything she touches turns to a gold rush. She's even putting the National Football League on the map, at least for those who weren't into it. Every time there's news about her attending a game to see her boyfriend Travis Kelce, the Kansas City Chiefs star, ticket prices go soaring. In one game, they increased by over 40%. After all, she doesn't love the drama, it loves her. Despite the ups and downs, the interrupted speeches, the media backlash, Taylor Swift has managed to stay relevant. To some, she's the new romantic. To others, she's the anti-hero. Call it what you want. Taylor Swift is here to stay. And from Swifties to global economies, everyone is thankful for it.
That will be deployed in CENTCOM, and they are not going to Israel, by the way. And 16 attacks that USA has faced in Iraq and Syria in the last 10 days, 10 to 15 days, has been a reason why USA is deploying another warship also in the region, sending about 900 troops, sending THAAD batteries, patriotic missiles, and other weaponries that could not only defend US forces in the region, but also can provide a deterrence in the region. That is what US government has been saying. Meanwhile, the situation in Syria and in Middle East remains very fluid. There have been multiple attacks on US forces in the last few days, and in one of those attacks, about 21 US personnel were injured also. And these responses that USA have been doing, our USA side has saying that these are because of the escalation from the Iranian proxies in the region. Secretary of Defense Austin Lloyd has said that US Eisenhower and THAAD battery and additional Patriot BNS to the CENTCOM region are being readied, and this was about 4 days ago. And now USA has finally sent about 900 troops, THAAD battery missiles and Patriot missiles, and another warship in that region. And USA has said that this will bolster the US presence, strengthen their military bases in the region. It will also create a deterrence against US forces in the region, and deterring a full-scale conflict. And at the same time, it will also provide an additional support to Israel in case of need. USA had earlier last week also, USA had shot down a missile in the Red Sea which was launched from Yemen towards USA. There were certain troops who were injured. US Navy has said that Houthi rebels had launched that missile in the Red Sea, where USA tried to shoot it down. And also in the last few days, what USA has been continuously telling the world that it doesn't want the war between Israel and other nations to escalate into full-fledged conflict in the region. But at the same time, US is preparing all possibilities. Many warships have been sent into the region. High quality guided precision missiles were sent to the region, and there is a preparedness for any eventuality that US forces might see in that region. Meanwhile, Syrian war continues to go on. There are multiple factions in Syria who have been supported by many countries, including USA, Russia, Iran. We have seen USA siding along with the rebel forces. Then Russia and Iran are backing the Al-Assad regime. So there are certain geographies which is controlled by the rebel forces. Then there are certain geographies controlled by the Assad forces, and these geographies keep changing with the ongoing war. Sometimes some faction take advantage of the situation. But then there are rebel factions, and there are numerous of them. We have seen some of which they have been receiving varying degree of support from various countries present in the region. Kurdish forces, they are also one of the stronghold, and they have been backed by USA in many ways. Then there are presence of Islamic groups, ISIS as well. We have seen USA and other nations fighting against the ISIS. At peak of ISIS, it has captured swath of Iraq and Syrian land. Then there are international involvement also. Sometimes Turkey government also gets involved. We have recently seen Israeli government striking Aleppo airport. Major cities in Yemen have been attacked by these countries. So the situation in Syria always remains very fluid in the last 1 decade, at least since the launch or since the beginning of the civil war that has started in Syria. But with the latest the latest strike of US forces into that region, it will remain to be seen whether this is going ahead towards a full-fledged escalation where the countries like Iran, Syria, Russia and the other country present in the Middle East region could also get dragged into this conflict, or this is just a preparedness from the US side, as it has said, and a deterrent in the region that will ensure that the wars does not escalate to a full-fledged conflict and the situation remains where it is right now. US missiles have targeted some eastern part of Syria which were used by Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces, and this is the latest that is happening in Syria, and the US military forces have termed these missile attacks as a way of self-defense, and they were conducted at two facilities in eastern Syria where the Iranian IRGC, the Iranian guards, are using these facilities to support Syria's government right now. And this is also happening in the wake of in the last 1.5 weeks several attacks have happened on US forces present in the area, and with the latest escalation that one can witness in happening in Middle East,
नौजवान साथी हमारा है, केंद्रीय मंत्री बनवाने में मेरी भूमिका थी उनको.
And as far as I'm concerned, whatever job I've been given, whether it's in Jaipur or Delhi, in the organization or in the government, I've done my fullest.
उन्हें गठबंधन बनाया, इंडी गठबंधन. जब बाढ़ आती है तो जान बचाने के लिए एक ही पेड़ पे आदमी भी लिपट जाता है, सांप भी बैठ जाता है.
I've run elections for 44 years, and they are going to preach to me where I am from. It's rubbish.
दिग्विजय सिंह ने कहा है कि आप एक नाटक नहीं कर रहे. आपको बुरा लगा ये सुन?
मुझे अंतरात्मा पे जैसे चोट की हो किसी.
How serious is this charge of sharing your login and password as a parliamentarian? I believe this system only came into existence in 2019.
India is not dharma nirpeksh, it is panth nirpeksh. That's why the Constituent Assembly decided against including the word secular in the preamble in 1950. Indira Gandhi only introduced that word in 76, and that was for a wholly political reason.
The SIT wants to investigate these madrasas. There are a lot of opposing voices. They say that this is deliberately being done around election time. Some of them have been functioning or operational even before independence. Why send them notices? Why this crackdown? This is terrorism, and this is unacceptable. Whether Hamas carries it out, or Lashkar-e-Taiba carries it out, or Al-Qaeda carries it out, you cannot attack innocent, non-combatant civilians, howsoever justifiable you have a political grievance.
Trying to send about 900 US troops that will be deployed in CENTCOM, and they are not going to Israel, by the way. And 16 attacks that USA has faced in Iraq and Syria in the last 10 days or 10 to 15 days has been a reason why USA is deploying another warship also in the region, sending about 900 troops, sending THAAD batteries, patriotic missiles and other weaponries that could not only defend US forces in the region but also can provide a deterrence in the region. That is what US government has been saying. Meanwhile, the situation in Syria and in Middle East remains very fluid. There have been multiple attacks on US forces in the last few days, and in one of those attacks about 21 US personnel were injured also, and these responses that USA have been doing Our USA side has saying that these are because of the escalation from the Iranian proxies in the region. Secretary of Defense Austin Lloyd has said that US Eisenhower and THAAD battery and additional Patriot BNS to the CENTCOM region are being readied, and this was about 4 days ago, and now USA has finally sent about 900 troops, THAAD battery missiles and Patriot missiles and another warship in that region. And USA has said that this will bolster the US presence, strengthen their military bases in the region. It will also create a deterrence against US forces in the region, and deterring a full-scale conflict. And at the same time, it will also provide an additional support to Israel in case of need. USA had earlier last week also USA had shot down a missile in the Red Sea which was launched from Yemen towards USA. There were certain troops who were injured. US Navy has said that Houthi rebels had launched that missile in the Red Sea, where USA tried to shoot it down. And also in the last few days, what USA has been continuously telling the world that it doesn't want the war between Israel and other nation to escalate into full.
कितनी अजीब बात है, पानी से चारों तरफ से घिरी ये दुनिया पानी के ही संकट से जूझ रही है।
ग्रामीण इलाकों में लोग पानी की बूंद बूंद के लिए भटक रहे हैं।
राजधानी के 70 से ज्यादा इलाके में पानी की किल्लत। एक तरफ वो लोग हैं जो कुछ सालों में ही पानी की किल्लत झेलने को मजबूर हो जाएंगे,
तो आने वाले कुछ दशकों में दुनिया के कई प्रमुख शहर सूखे की चपेट में आ सकते हैं।
तो दूसरी तरफ वो लोग हैं जो सदियों से इस मजबूरी के बोझ को ढोते आ रहे हैं,
खासकर महिलाएं। नेशनल सैंपल सर्वे ऑफिस के 2012 के डेटा के हिसाब से भारत की 54% रूरल महिलाओं को हर रोज एवरेज 20 मिनट पैदल चलना पड़ता है, उस पानी के लिए जो किसी भी इंसान की एक बेसिक जरूरत है।
लेकिन संकट चाहे कितना भी बड़ा क्यों ना हो, समाधान निकल ही जाता है अगर ठान लिया जाए तो।
पानी के क्षेत्र में पिछले 70 साल में जो काम हुआ, हमें 5 साल में 4 गुने से भी ज्यादा उस काम को करना हो।
काम यानी हर घर में फंक्शनल टैप वाटर देना, जो तब तक सिर्फ तकरीबन 16% रूरल हाउसहोल्ड्स में ही मौजूद था, उसे 100% करना था, वो भी सिर्फ 5 सालों में। ये एक ऐसा मैसिव प्रोजेक्ट था जो अब से पहले ना सोचा गया था ना किया गया था। तो फिर कैसे मुमकिन हुआ ये? जानते हैं हिंदुस्तान के हर घर तक पानी पहुंचने की कहानी।
भारत में पूरे विश्व का 17% लोग यहाँ रहते हैं, और पशुओं की भी जनसंख्या बहुत ज़्यादा है। पूरे विश्व में सबसे ज़्यादा जनसंख्या यहाँ पे है, परंतु पूरे विश्व का सिर्फ 4% पानी जो है हमारे देश में है। क्लाइमेट चेंज की वजह से बरसात भी इरेटिक होती है। एक
तरफ इरेटिक बरसात, दूसरी तरफ भारत का विशाल लैंडस्केप, इतना विशाल कि जितने तरह के क्षेत्र और मौसम पूरी दुनिया में मौजूद है, वो सब आपको भारत में मिलेंगे, और साथ ही मिलेगी हर एरिया की अपनी यूनिक पानी की प्रॉब्लम।
एक तरफ फ्लड आते हैं जैसे बेंगलुरु में हो रहा है,
शहर डूबते जा रहे हैं हमारे,
और दूसरी तरफ ड्राउट है इस देश में।
जब हम छोटे थे तो यहाँ तक पानी बर्फ होते थे, तो आज तक बर्फ भी कम होना शुरू हो गया। ये तो हम समझते हैं कि ग्लोबल वार्मिंग से है।
पिछले समझ लो 8-10 सालों से तो ये पानी ग्राउंड लेवल एकदम जीरो हो गया है। अभी नीचे से तो पानी निकल ही नहीं रहा।
Most places in Meghalaya will see plenty of rainfall. It doesn't stay in our place because of the terrain. It goes as runoff to the plains in Bangladesh.
यहाँ के ग्राउंड वाटर में मेनली तो TDS जो है बहुत ज़्यादा है, क्लोराइड्स काफ़ी हाई है, इसके कारण की पानी में खारापन काफ़ी ज़्यादा है, बिल्कुल भी पीने लायक नहीं है यहाँ पे।
सबसे पहले जो ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन आया इस देश में वो पंजाब में आया था। आज की स्थिति में पंजाब में 3.1 मिलियन हेक्टेयर पर चावल लगाया जाता है। उससे रिजल्ट ये हुआ है कि देश में सबसे ज़्यादा अगर किसी भी प्रदेश में पानी का स्तर नीचे गया है, वो पंजाब में गया है। ये एक बहुत ही अलार्मिंग सिचुएशन मानी जाती है। तो फ्लड की सिचुएशन अलग है, उसको किस तरह से टैकल करें, ड्राउट की सिचुएशन डिफरेंट है, उसको किस तरह से टैकल करें, ये एक देश के लिए बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज है।
नीति आयोग ने 2018 की रिपोर्ट में बताया कि भारत में 60 करोड़ से ज्यादा लोग एक्सट्रीम वाटर स्ट्रेस्ड एरियाज में रहते हैं और इस कारण उन्हें पानी के उन ओपन सोर्सेस पर निर्भर होना पड़ता है जो सिर्फ गंदे ही नहीं बल्कि जानलेवा भी हैं।
देश के 209 जिले ऐसे हैं जहां लोग ऐसा पानी पी रहे हैं जिसमें खतरनाक केमिकल और मेटल घुले हुए हैं।
हम जानते हैं कि हमारे देश में जगह जगह पे कुछ केमिकल कंटामिनेंट्स हैं।
ये सभी को मालूम है कि जो वाटर बॉर्न डिजीजेज हैं, चाहे वो डिसेंट्री हो, कॉलरा हो, और इसमें बच्चे जो है बहुत ज्यादा वल्नरेबल होते हैं
और उनके चलते बहुत लॉन्ग टर्म हेल्थ इश्यूज बन जाते हैं।
फ्लोराइड से एक फ्लोरोसिस नाम की बीमारी होती है जिसमें हड्डियां टेढ़ी हो जाती हैं, दांत पीले पड़ जाते हैं, उनकी मसल्स में भी कमजोरी आ जाती है। ऐसे ही आर्सेनिक से एक डिजीज होती है जिसमें जो है कि ये कैंसर टाइप की होती है।
लेकिन महिलाओं को कई और खतरे भी थे।
It's also a safety issue because जब औरतें सुबह शाम जाग के पानी के लिए जाती हैं बाहर, we know there are so many gender issues around this whole aspect.
कुछ हिस्सों में इस देश में अभी भी औरतों को कितनी लंबी दूरी तय करनी पड़ती है सुबह कि जाके दूर से पानी लाएं।
पीने को तो रोज 4-5 बार घड़े लाने, बड़े बड़े होते हैं हमारे पास पीतल के, वो किल्टे में डालने, किल्टे में ऊंचाई में जाना, वो कहीं फिसल गए, पैर ही मोस आ जाती थी और वो टोई पहले ही पहुंच जाती थी घर के पास, और खुद ऊपर फिर जाओ घड़े को फिर लेके आओ ऊपर। बहुत दिक्कत थी हमारे को पानी की। कैन 15 लीटर वाले कैन डाल के फिर 1 किलोमीटर जाना पड़ता सर, सर्दी के वक्त बर्फ गिरने से भी जाना पड़ता सर।
पीने का साफ और सुरक्षित पानी कहने को तो ये एक बुनियादी मानव अधिकार है, लेकिन रूरल इंडिया का एक बड़ा तबका इससे वंचित था। पर अब समय आ चुका था उन्हें ये हक मिलने का।
हर घर को जल कैसे मिले, पीने का शुद्ध पानी कैसे मिले, और इसलिए आज मैं लाल किले से घोषित करता हूं कि हम आने वाले दिनों में जल जीवन मिशन को लेकर के आगे बढ़ेंगे।
हर घर में, वो डेजर्ट में रहता हो, पहाड़ पे रहता हो, उसको नल से पानी पहुंच जाएगा, ऐसा तो सोचना भी जरा डिफिकल्ट है।
पिछले 70 वर्षों में कितनी भी कोशिश करी है सरकार ने, मगर हमारे देश के अंदर पानी की जो किल्लत है वो बढ़ती गई है।
फर्स्ट प्रायोरिटी जो है पीने के लिए पानी चाहिए, वो देश में 75 साल में अभी तक इस तरह से नहीं हुआ कि हर घर में जाके जल मिल जाए।
It is not a program for taps in every house. It is a program for functional tap in every house.
तो look at the scale of the issue. उस समय तक 3.25 करोड़ भी नए घर ऐसे थे जिनमें ऐसी व्यवस्था थी, और हमारे कुल ग्रामीण घर 19 करोड़ से भी ज्यादा हैं। तो लगभग 16 करोड़ नए घरों में ये व्यवस्था करनी थी।
इतना बड़ा प्रोजेक्ट है, हर साल 3 करोड़ 20 लाख घर, तो डेली 1 लाख घरों से ज्यादा कनेक्शन देना है।
और उन्होंने हमें बहुत टाइट टाइमलाइन दी
कि 5 साल में करना है, कि हर काम को स्पीड से करना है और स्केल से करना है। ये नहीं है कि 10, 20, 30 साल तक स्कीम चलती रहे। उसके लिए जो पैसा चाहिए 3,60,000 करोड़ रुपए फंड का जो है प्रोविजन किया गया, और ये काम जो है 15 अगस्त को अनाउंस होने के बाद जो है इसकी प्लानिंग, एग्जीक्यूशन और ये सब शुरू हुआ।
हमारे दोनों विभाग हम इकट्ठा होकर इसके बारे में सोचा कि हम कैसे ये यकीनी बनाएं कि जितना भी पानी है, पहली बात उसका सही तरीके से प्रयोग, और दूसरी ओर हम इसको बढ़ा कैसे सकते हैं, क्योंकि स्रोतों को और बढ़ाने की भी जरूरत है।
काम जितना बड़ा था, वक्त उतना ही कम, लेकिन कम वक्त में भी जवाब